piece of the collection. This is called the Matador, and runs as some of the stories do with a little bit more serious content. So, here you go. The Matador. He heard fierce screams outside the barn. Charging out, he heard another voice yelling for help from a distance. The work boots he wore clamped against the earth as his lungs burned. He hadn't run flat out for decades now. Around the shed and along the fence of the pasture, he saw his eldest grandson pulling the younger grandson through the gate. A hollowness bored through his body as he heard Doris, his wife, come out the front porch, the screen door slapping shut behind her as she called out his name. He heard her call, but she was behind him, her dress whisking along the grass. He saw the bull, head down, charging along the fence. Lowering his own head, he pumped his arms harder and forced his old legs to move faster. The last time he ran as fast had been during the war. Then he saw the blood covering Jake, and Chris, the older brother, closing the gate, and the bull lumbering past with a snort, drool flying and tail flicking as it rounded west and headed over a hill. Skidding to a stop, he knelt before his grandsons. What happened? The bull. Jake, it was the bull. Chris mumbled through sobs. Jake lay motionless. His right leg was mangled. Bones stuck out his thigh and through his jeans. The lower half of his leg jutted inward sharply where no such joint existed. His right arm and hand were swollen, and a large goose egg had already formed on his head. He gently leaned Jake on his side to see that the boy had been partially gored. He immediately stood and turned to Doris, who was near him, and he raised his hand to stop her. "Get towels," he said, "a water basin and a jug of water, and get down here. I'll get the car." He looked at Chris, who was rocking on his knees and repeating Jake's name. "Chris, stay here with your brother. I'll be right back." By the time he pulled the car around, Doris was just getting back. "Put that stuff in the back seat," he said, "and help me with Jake." Doris put the items in the car, came around the side, and had her first good look at Jake. "Oh my Lord," she said, drawing a hand to her mouth, brow knitting and voice wavering as she shuddered breaths. "Ain't no time for that now," he barked. "Grab him under the arms. I'll take his legs. Be careful of his side." He came in from the flank, sliding his arm under both legs and trying to lift them as carefully as he could. Jake was still unconscious, which made things difficult in the first place, but the right leg folded and rose and turned no matter how he tried to hold it. They gently placed him in the back seat, and Doris got in with him as he and Chris piled into the front. He sped off, going as fast as he could manage without tossing them around the inside of the car. "Lon. Oh, Jesus, Lord above, Lon, he's moving his head. Keep him still. Keep your hands on his side. There's so much. Lon, go faster. Please, go faster." Veering onto the highway, he let the engine open up. He watched the needle sway wide to the right as he pushed the car and jumped between lanes to pass, blaring the horn. Jake, honey. Oh, he's throwing up. He's throwing up. Turn his head, but do it gently. He heard retching from the back seat, and then an animalistic moan that rose in pitch. He's trying to raise his arm. Just keep him still. He looked over to Chris next to him. He was sitting on his knees facing the back, his hands clamped to the seat. He hadn't said a word since they got in the car. He just stared at his brother. Jake began to moan and whisper with gasps, gulps, and sobs. Lon had heard such noises only once before, in Korea, when soldiers were dying from gruesome wounds and inescapable pain. The road began to blur as Doris began to whisper, vaulting prayers into the clear blue sky. The bestial calls continued from the back seat. He thought of the bull, his head down and to the side, running along the fence, still after Jake, his hooves stamping the hard clay into cement. He wiped his eyes, and with the town in sight now on the horizon, buried the needle, pushing it off the base of the speedometer. He sat in the waiting area of the ER with Chris next to him, still silent. He didn't ask the boy what had happened. It didn't matter now. And whatever they had been doing in there, knowing the pasture was the only one off limits to him, didn't matter either. He'd been punished enough. He knew the boy would carry this guilt with him for the rest of his life, whether his brother made it or not. Doris walked into the room. They're going into surgery now, but they don't know if he's going to make it yet. Rising, he kissed Doris on the forehead. Call Junior, he said, and Mary Ann. I'll be back. But where are you going? Didn't you hear me? They don't know if he's going to make it. I have to go. I'll be back. I'll take Junior at least 2 hours to get here. But what about Jake? There isn't anything I can do for him now anyways. He hugged her. I'll be back. I promise. Out in the parking lot, he saw an arc of blood drying on the driver's side door. Looking down at his hands, he realized he was covered in blood. The inside of the car was even worse, filled with handprints and smudges. A pool collected in the back seat and stained wet towels were bunched into a corner. The upholstery was damp and red, the steering wheel too. Chris's handprints remaining clearly outlined on the seat. Driving back out of town, he stopped at a gas station, washed his hands and face, and bought a pack of cigarettes. It was the first time he bought cigarettes since he asked Doris to marry him when he returned from the war. It was one of the conditions of marriage, no smoking. He drove home slowly with everything in the car turned off and the windows up, the pack of cigarettes in his breast pocket. Pulling into the long driveway, he looked to the west for Colo, but he couldn't see him. Inside the house, he walked into the kitchen, pulled the whiskey and a shot glass out of the cabinet above the refrigerator and poured a shot. Walking upstairs, he packed the cigarettes in the palm of his hand before he propped one into the corner of his mouth. In his bedroom, he got on his knees before the foot of the bed, and with a grunt, he jerked out a square, padlocked trunk. Pulling out his keys, he found one for the padlock and opened the chest. Flipping back the top blanket, he grabbed the Zippo he'd used in the army, sparked it, and lit a cigarette. He inhaled and felt hot smoke clog his throat and lungs. Exhaling, he reached back into the trunk, then closed it. Since the war, every month, once a month, he'd open the trunk, never more and never less, because other than the monthly cleaning of his M1 Garand, he didn't talk about the war or show people items from the war. This was the only time the trunk had ever been opened twice in 1 month. Sitting on the trunk, he quickly disassembled the gun and checked everything while drawing the glowing ember closer to his lips. With the gun reassembled, he picked up the end block clip, inserted it, rolled the bolt forward with his hand, and struck the handle with his palm, closing the bolt. Outside, he ground the butt of his cigarette. He ground out the butt of his cigarette. He slung his rifle and lit another one. He entered the pasture as the sun began to redden on the horizon, and he humped up the hill looking for the bull. He found the beast grazing in a gentle, sloping valley and marched down the hill toward it. Letting the sling drop freely, he wrapped around his left forearm and ripped the rifle between the receiver and the stock with his left hand. His right hand clenched the Garand around the front handguard. As he neared, the bull began to move. But he came along the massive animal and kicked it as hard as he could beneath its flank. As the bull reared in his direction and lowered his head, he slammed the butt of the rifle into the side of its skull, partially striking an eye with the butt plate. The bull contorted swiftly and catapulted its rear end and legs round to knock him into the grass with force. He rolled with his momentum, pulled to safety, and fired a round from his hip. The round tagged the bull, and the animal bellowed, jumped, and spun, then trotted away in a wide circle until his partially sheared horns squared towards him again. He got to one knee and shouldered the rifle. The bull was in his sights some 25 feet away. "All right, you son of a bitch," he whispered, the rifle steady. The bull charged. When it was 10 feet away, he fired a round into the bull's left front leg, and he jumped up and dove to the right, as the bull staggered and tumbled, wildly tossing his head as it went by. He came out from his roll with a rifle shouldered. The bull slowed and stood, favoring its left front leg. It shook its muzzle, drool flying everywhere as it snorted and lowered its head. Bastard. He aimed and fired into the right leg and then jumped to the left as the bull reared. It staggered from the second blow, but lunged and caught him by the legs, which spun him around in midair as easy as an pinwheel. He landed on his stomach, the wind knocked out of him and facing the bull as it wheeled around. The animal faltered on his front legs as it tried to stop its momentum and turn. It was hesitant now, and he remained lying on the ground, rifle aimed. It took a step, and he fired 2 rounds into the front of its neck. Groaning, the bull charged, but his power was draining now, sprinkling the lush green grass with red. He stood and calmly fired again. It fell. Standing over it, he put a foot on its side near its main front legs, and he felt the vibration of its labored breath through his boots. He brought the rifle to his shoulder.